I welcome everyone to this webinar, and I would like to thank you all for taking the time out. Now, today we are going to talk about mastering communication skills. I hope the screen is visible. Let me tell you the protocols to be with us in this session. I would request all of you to make this webinar interactive along with me, and you are more than welcome to share your valuable insights, answer questions, or offer any suggestions or comments if you like. You can either use your mic. For that, you can raise your hand and our representatives will unmute your mic, or you can also choose to drop us a message in the chat box and we can take it forward. All right, without any further ado, please let us take it forward. Speaking of communication, there is a common expression. The more you do something, the better you get at it. Practice makes perfect. How many of you would agree with this expression? That yes, practice makes perfect. The more you do something, the better you get at it. Anyone who disagrees with this thought? The more you do something, the better you get at it. Practice makes perfect. What do you think? Now, generally, the people we come across, they tell us that is true, right? And we have a long list of participants with us in this session who agrees with this thought. Now, can you quickly give me your first recollection of your first interaction in this world? What do you think? At what age might you have communicated for the very first time in your life? Any suggestions, any guesses? How old might you have been when you communicated for the very first time in your life? Exactly, at birth. Now, many people they say that we started communicating at the age of 16 months, 20 months, 18 months, and I tell them that with apologies, you started very late in life. The moment we were born, the moment we took birth, our arrival to this world, the first thing we did is we communicated through an act of cry. And with this act of cry, we warned our parents that just in case if you're planning to have peaceful night sleep, just forget about it. For the next 2 months, I'm not going to let you sleep at all at night. Maybe you need to change your sleeping order. So the more we do something, the better we get at it. Practice makes perfect. And how long have you been communicating? We've been communicating since birth. So it's safe to say that at least each one of us have been communicating above 20 years of our life. Now, here's the question. We've been communicating for more than 20 years of our life. Have our communication become perfect? Can anyone claim that my communication has become perfect? It's a difficult claim to make, right? Kamran Saab says no one. It's a very difficult claim to make. Now, what could be the reason? We agreed with the first thought. The more you do something, the better you get at it. We agreed with the thought that practice makes perfect. And yet, here we are practicing for more than 2 decades, and still our communication is not perfect. The answer is very simple. Communication is a lifelong skill. You can never claim to have mastered communication because with every era, the need and the requirements of the communication has been changing. So we have already used the word communication many a times. How would you like to define communication? What is communication to you? Can I have a quick word on that? Anyone who would like to define communication for me? Go on. Please motivate yourself. Great. So Irshad Saab says it is exchange of emotions. So when we use the word exchange, it means you are exchanging this emotion with someone. So there is another party involved. Mr. Shariar says it is a way of interaction with others. Great. And this is the point. Whenever we talk about communication, Miss Ikra also says that it is an intersection with others. Rightly so. Now we need to understand that when it comes to communication or when it comes to defining communication, majority of the people say that it is an exchange, it is a sharing between two people, which means you're practically saying that communication is a two-way process. It is bilateral and it involves two parties. That could be a sender and a receiver. And this sender and receiver could be a speaker and a listener, a writer and a reader, and maybe someone who is expressing through the body language and facial expressions and non-verbals, and there's someone who is observing all of this. And the exchange that is taking place between them is of feelings, thoughts, knowledge, information, and many others. And that is exactly how we get to see the definition of communication on Google, any other search engine, or even business communication books. But here's this thought: there's one thing that troubles me with this definition. How about the following questions? Have you ever got upset in life? Anyone ever got upset in life? If not, I would dearly like to know your secret, because I would also want to, have a life where I never get upset. Ikra says, of course, everyone gets upset in life, right? Each one of us. And I guess post COVID, we have learned many new words. Upset is a very small word. Post COVID, we have learned the words like anxiety, stress, depression, and what not. So here's this thought: when we get upset, there are two ways of coming out of that upset state of mind. Either someone around us help us come out of that state, or at times we try and pull ourselves up. At times we try and change our mood ourselves. So when it comes to helping your own self to come out of that state of mind, what do you do? Everyone does it differently. What's your secret? How do you help yourself come out of that upset state of mind? Can you share? What do you do? Now, there are different people who would do different things. Someone might listen to songs, someone might watch, funny, entertaining content. Someone might just go out on a walk and talk to oneself. Someone might, lock himself or herself up in the room and scream. Someone might start eating. And Rhino says that sleeping could be a way out. And Rhino, I must say, if you're able to sleep when you're upset, you are blessed. Trust me, my friend, this is a gift, because a bigger majority of us cannot even think of coming close to sleeping when we are upset. So that's a gift. But point being, when we are in these states and we're talking to ourselves, when we are writing our feelings down on a piece of paper for our own self, when we are, reflecting upon the situation in our mind and there's no other party involved, can we take these instances as example of communication? Is talking to oneself communication? Is penning your feelings down on a piece of paper communication? Is reflecting on your thought communication? Nisha says that she takes deep breaths and she converses with herself to console herself. Is that an act of communication? Nisha, what would you say? Do you take it as communication? I must say that's a very good strategy, but is that communication? And she says, yes, it's a piece of communication. Then what became of our definition of communication? That it has to be bilateral. When we talk to our own selves, I don't think we can count ourselves as two. In any situation, we are just one. So how would that be communication? Because you define communication as a bilateral process. Now, here is the thing: many of us firmly believe that communication is a two-way process. And I've said earlier on, even business communication books, even search engines tell us the same definition. But we need to understand that there are more than one types of communication. And here we would like to discuss two. And what are these two types of communication? Interpersonal communication and intrapersonal communication. Now, what exactly is the difference between the two? The basic difference is the number of the people involved in the process. The communication that you defined to us was interpersonal communication that involved two parties, where two parties are engaged in the communication process. The other form of communication is intrapersonal communication, and that is unilateral. That is a dialogue with oneself. That is your self reflection. And it is generally said that intrapersonal communication is, if not more important, then at least as important as interpersonal communication. They say that people who can take a pause and reflect upon what they are to say, they generally end up engaging themselves in a more successful and effective communication process. Why? Because the words they use are chosen and calculated. If we do not engage ourselves in the intrapersonal communication process, we are likely to end up saying something that may end up offending others, or something that we might end up regretting later. So always think before you say. which means always engage yourself with intrapersonal communication and then engage yourself with interpersonal communication. The more effective your intrapersonal communication gets, the more efficient your interpersonal communication remains. So, moving on with this thought, how many of you would like to consider yourself as listeners? Now, how many of you are listeners? I didn't use the word effective. I didn't ask how many of you are effective listeners. The question is, how many of you are listeners? The word effective is not there. What do you think? How many of you are listeners? Let me see. All. All right. Mr. Adnan says all of you are listeners. And then individually, Rhino and Amjad and Sajjad and many others, everyone claims, so does Mr. Rana. So everyone claims to be a listener. Now, here is a question for you. We have already talked about the difference between intrapersonal communication and interpersonal communication. How many types of interpersonal communication skills can you think of? Quick response. You're not supposed to think too long. Yes. Can you give me a quick response to it? How many types of interpersonal communication skills can you think of? Yes. Go ahead. Ikra, Sufyan, Mr. Rana, Javad, Nisha, waiting for your responses. All right. Nisha says verbal communication, very good. Adnan Saab says vocal, email, social media, excellent. Sajjad Saab said anticipation. I'm greatly interested in these responses. Let me see if I can have one or two more instances. Yes. How would you like to define? How would you like to tell me how many types of interpersonal communication skills can you think of? Two more answers and I can move ahead. Great. Now, the bigger majority of you, okay, Mr. Atif says verbal. Now, bigger majority of you, your answers are intriguing and very interesting for me. As you would note that very few people said 6, 4, 2, they actually gave me numbers. And I ignored those answers. Why? Because those answers are right. So those friend who gave me numbers, your answers are right. And why is that so? Now, if you notice, the question is written right in front of us on the screen, and I repeated the question twice. The question is how many? Not what are, but how many? Which means, what do I want? I want numbers. So when Rabia says 6, when two more worthy participants said 4 or 2, someone said many, these are all correct answers. Why? Because they are answer against the question how many. But when you give me words, emotions, verbal, written, verbal, non-verbal, emails, all these are questions against the anticipated question, what are the different types of interpersonal communication skills you can think of? I never asked that question. And this is the thing. Many a times we do not have the patience to pay attention to what the speaker is saying. And instead, what do? Instead of listening, we end up anticipating, assuming what the other person may have meant. So you anticipated that I am perhaps asking you for the examples of interpersonal communication skills, whereas I literally requested you for the number you can offer for me on interpersonal communication skills. And this is a sensitive thing for all of us to realize that many communication or many interactions, they become ineffective. And why does it happen? Because we do not listen. We instead do what? We anticipate. So we need to step out of anticipation mode and we need to get into the gears of listening. Any questions before I move ahead? Not as yet. Great. I am very grateful for all of you for being so responsive in the chat box, and you're actually making this session very lively just because of your responses. So, quickly coming to effective listening skills, we have talked about the importance of listening and not getting into anticipation. So, there are 3 pointers I would like you to pay attention to. The aspects of listening skills that can make you an effective listener. Number one, active listening. What do we do when it comes to active listening? It means you need to pay attention, ask questions, which you are in the chat box, and I'm very grateful for that. You provide feedback. You're doing that as well to show that you are engaged. And trust me, you are engaged with me in this session, and you have shown to be yourselves to be an active listener. Then comes critical listeners. And who are critical listeners? the ones who evaluate the information that they hear, to consider the content for its value and relevance. All right, can someone please mute this mic? Thank you very much. Now, when you listen to someone, at times what happens that the words do not match the nonverbals of the speaker. So a critical listener would look both at the visuals and the nonverbals of the speaker to go with the words that they use, to go with the content that they use, to see how honest they are being with the content they're using. And then comes empathetic listening. You try to understand the speaker's perspective and feeling, even if you don't agree with them. You try and show that you care and you value what they say. So even if you are to decline what they're saying, even if you are to refuse what they're saying, you will first make your best effort to listen to them and help them see and understand that you did your best effort to listen to them. And when you are coming up with a response, be it positive or negative, it is on the basis of your listening and comprehension to what the other person has said. And if you have shown yourself to be an engaged listener, an emphatic listener, a critical listener, your speaker will respect your point of view in your response. Then comes to verbal communication techniques. And before we come to verbal communication technique, let us look at the word verbal itself. A common expression for verbal communication is spoken messages are verbal messages. So do you agree with this thought that only spoken messages are verbal messages? Anyone who disagrees with this thought? Only spoken messages are verbal messages. And Mr. Sajjad disagrees with me. He says no. So Sajjad, what other messages can be considered as verbal messages other than written? Yes. And others are invited to respond to this question as well. Are only spoken messages verbal messages? Mariam says signs and symbols are also messages. Of course. Those are non-verbal messages. Messages. How about others? Let us see. What do others think about it? Go ahead. Encourage yourself to respond. Kamran Rizvi Saab agrees with that as well. Great going, Kamran. What do others think? Yes. 2 or 3 more responses before I move ahead. Now, here's the thought. Sayyid Rauf Saab says face to face and on phone. That is true. But face to face and on phone, you are using your spoken message. So that takes us back to the same definition that spoken messages are verbal messages. Mr. Alam says informative and persuasive messages. Exactly. But informative and persuasive messages could be used both in writing and in speech. The question was, are only spoken messages verbal, or can there be other messages that can be considered verbal? Now, the idea is there are two established school of thoughts on this definition. One school of thought says that only spoken messages are verbal messages, messages where you get to use your vocals. Messages where you get to use your vocals is verbal. Whereas the other school of thought says no. Any message that involves words, be it spoken or written, are verbal messages. So if you are writing a message down, that is also a verbal message. Now, this is also an established thought. So the definition is correct. Now, we are free to choose whichever school of thought we want to be a part of. So if you want to say no, I would like to think that only spoken messages are verbal, perfect. Or if someone wants to say no, any message that involves words, so even written messages are verbal, perfect. Let us do a small experiment here. Why don't you write a sentence down? And if you don't have any noting pad with you, you can pay attention and listen to the sentence and do as directed. I want you to write, I can read it. 4-word expression, as simple as it is. I can read it. Now the task is read it quietly and silently in your mind. Can you do that? Of course you can. But then we need to understand that there is a small challenge attached to it. There is a small condition attached to it. And what is that? When you read this message quietly and silently to yourself, you must not get to hear the sounds of these words in your mind. For example, When I read it quietly to myself, in my mind, I get to hear the word I can read it. Until and unless I get to hear these sounds, I am unable to read it. But I'm just an ordinary person. Why don't you go ahead and try it yourself? Can you do that? I bet a bigger majority of you can't. Who can? There are people who are exceptional. And who are these people? Who have photogenic memory. So if you have got photogenic memory, perhaps you can do that. But the percentage of those people in the world who have photogenic memory is very small. It's rather few. So a bigger majority of us, almost all of us, cannot read it. And that's the point. The other school of thought says where words get involved, sounds get involved. So when you say something out in the air, you use sounds. When you write something down, you use sounds. Either those sounds are out aloud in the air or those sounds are in your mind, but those sounds are there. So wherever words get involved, messages become verbal. But as I've said, there are two school of thoughts, and you're free to decide which school of thought you would want to be part of. So quickly coming to the verbal communication techniques, how can we make our verbal communication messages clearer? The first thing is clarity. Use clear and concise language that is easy to understand. This is the myth. Some of us believe that if we use more challenging and complex vocabulary, if we use more complex sentence structures, our communication will look more effective. But we need to understand that the best message is one that gets across to your audience. The best message is one that your audience can understand. So if your audience can understand your message, I think no message can be better than this message. Why? Because the purpose is achieved. And for that, you need to decide for yourself what is the level of complexity of the language you want to keep. Of course, it depends upon your audience. So if you are engaging yourself with someone who is highly qualified and well versed in the domain you are having a discussion in, perhaps you might want to choose specific vocabulary that is coming from that register, jargon that we call it. Otherwise, perhaps if you are talking to a layman, someone who is not from that specific field, you might want to use simpler expressions, but the awareness of your audience would matter when it comes to deciding upon the choice of words. Then respect. Be respectful of others' opinion. Everyone has got different, set of beliefs. You may disagree with them, but you need to do it respectfully. You cannot be very blunt and go ahead that you say that I don't agree with what you have said. Well, you can disagree. You're free to disagree with the others, but the choice of words that you use for that would matter most. And finally, conciseness. Avoid unnecessary words and jargons. Here we have a comment, and Amjad Saab said, "You are very true. The same logic can be applied to research papers." That is perfectly spot on, Amjad Sahab. And Ikra says, I also think if is clear, and this is precisely the point that I'm trying to make. You have endorsed my thought, Ikra. Thank you for that. And I personally believe that if you somehow can incorporate two communication principles, communication, your communication will be of the engagement two magical words. Of course, we are not going to violate the other basic writing principles or communication principles, but if you adhere to these two principles, trust me, your communication will always be successful. Because if your message is concise, it will get across. And if it gets across with clarity, you will have your desired response. Let's quickly move on. Let us look at then what is non-verbal communication? The idea is that is non-verbal communication. Now, the messages we create through our facial expression, through our tone of voice, through our pitch, through the loudness of our voice, through the hand gestures, the body gestures that we use, how we stand, the eye contact that we maintain, the smiles that we have, the frowning we have on the forehead. Each one of these are instances of non-verbal communication. I'll take a very quick example. Let's say, and there's too much traffic between the two ends. and then you get to see that someone is trying to pull out the side mirror, the rear view mirror of your Mercedes. How would you react to that? Now, you would immediately use your non-verbals. You will wave to this person. You will try and get the attention of this person, implying to him that you've spotted this person. And then there will be a loud hey. Granted that this hey would be very different in different languages that we will use in that moment, but I guess hey would be the safest expression to suggest all the different meanings that you would be communicating to this person. The word is one, hey. But in this hey, with the tone that you have, you have communicated 1,000 words. You have warned this person. I have seen you. I have spotted you. One word, hey. And that is what we should. Your words matter. Your words are important. But there is another important thing. And what is that? To understand that when it comes to communication process, only 25 to 30% meanings are in words. The rest, 65 to 70 to 75% meanings are in nonverbals. The choice of word, your tone, your expression, your gesture. Is my voice is distorting? Is my voice still distorting, or am I clear? Can someone confirm?
Right now it's clear, but sometimes it gets distorted.
All right. But now it's fine. I hope, right?
Yeah, right now it is.
Great. So let us save time and move ahead with this. So here we are discussing 4 pointers. Let's move ahead. The components. All right. The components of corporate communication. Know your pauses. It's extremely important that you understand the importance of pauses, be it in your speech, be it in your written messages, even your choices that you make, be it your personal choices or your career choices. Now, here's a small task for you. I have some words written down for you here. It reads, let's eat and honey. I've merely read the words, not the sentence. I would request you to use punctuations and complete this sentence. I would like to see what sentence you make out of these 3 word expression with the use of punctuations. You can write your answers down in the chat box. You're not supposed to change the words, shuffle the order of the word. All you are allowed to do is use punctuations, maybe a sign of exclamation, a question mark, a comma, a semicolon, punctuation. Let us see. What do you make out of this sentence? Looking forward to some examples before I move ahead. All right, Mr. Rhino, this is an interesting thought. Wonderful. Mr. Kamran Saab has even an interesting expression. Okay, wonderful. Now, the responses that we have, they all are saying the same thing, that let's eat, comma, honey, with a sign of exclamation. So you're not talking about eating honey. Is that correct? You're talking about eating. Now, what are we eating? That is not very clearly stated in this sentence, but you are making a suggestion to eat. And you are saying it to perhaps, all right? But we need to understand that more than one meanings can be driven out of it. The first one that you have shared is the second one, let's eat honey. And another response that Mr. I missed out on that message that Miss Ikra has shared with us, and that is let's eat honey. So in one sentence, you are saying to eat honey, and in the other sentence, you're saying to your honey to start eating. Now, just by a mere insertion of a comma, the meaning has changed completely. And this is what we need to understand. Your punctuations matter, your pauses matter. A slight pause can change the meaning of your discourse completely and can distort your communication as well, if not aptly used. So always be aware of your pauses because pauses matter. Now, here is a very famous thought from George Bernard Shaw. He says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place, which means just because we have said something, we believe that communication has taken place. Now, we need to
Mr.
understand
Farhan,
that
we
that
are
is not true. Just that the other, yes.
We are facing voice distortion again.
Is the voice distorting again?
Yes, it is.
All right, just give me connection.
Surely.
All right. So am I still audible?
Yes, you are.
And is the audibility better?
Yes, it's better.
Great. So as I was saying, merely saying something is not communicating it. Let's assume for a minute that you are all my managers and you call me to your office, you explain a project to me, and then you tell me, Farhan Sahab, I want a bi-monthly report on this project. Bi-monthly being one word, bi-monthly. I want a bi-monthly report on this project. And today is, let's say, hypothetically speaking, 1st of October. So on 1st of October, you tell me you want a bi-monthly report on the project you have explained. So what do you think? When should I bring my first report to you? Bi-monthly report. All right. Adnan Saab says December. 2 months later, Adnan Saab. All right. Interesting. Let's see what do others think. Rhino says November. Irshad Saab says after 15 days because it's bi-monthly according to Irshad Sahab. What do others think? Muhammad Alam says November. Now, December, I can still make sense, but how November? Because today is 1st of October and the expression is bi monthly, bi monthly. Nisha says 2 months. And okay, 30th of October. Now, here's the thing. If we go on Google, interestingly, we will learn that there are two types of meaning of the word bi monthly. One expression means twice a month, 2 times in 1 month. That means 15th of October, then 30th of October. The other expression means once every 2 months. So, according to the two meanings of bi monthly, it could mean 15th of October, it could mean 1st of December. Now, being the manager, the meaning you knew was twice a month. So, you expected the report on 15th of October. Being the employee, the meaning I knew was once every 2 months. So, I brought it on 1st of December. Would you accept this report? Or am I in trouble? What do you think? Irshad Saab says I'm in trouble. Rightly so, perhaps. But here's the deal. You knew twice a month. I knew once every 2 months. How can I be at fault? But I have to be at fault. And why is that so? The boss is always right. Right? So it is not important here who is at fault. The important thing is a decision that was taken, that was to be taken 15 days later, will now be taken 2 months later. Perhaps it's too late to take a decision on it at all. And that is why it is important to use vivid expressions in your communication. What are vivid expressions? Vivid expressions are image building expressions. For example, if I tell you that my mobile has a good camera, is it an easy sentence to understand? My mobile has a good camera. Any confusion with that? In a normal context, if you tell someone that mobile has a good camera, I guess there's no confusion with that. We're perfectly okay. And at the end of the session, let's say I say, let's take a group photo. And someone says, Mr. Farhan said his mobile has a good camera. Let's take the picture from his mobile. And I said, go ahead, no problem. You take this picture and then you look at this picture and you look at this picture twice and you say, Farhan sahab, please don't mind. But I have a spare mobile in my storeroom and I have saved it so that if my actual mobile, it breaks down, I can use it for good 20, 30 minutes. Even that mobile has a better camera than yours. The idea is, what is a good camera? Maybe I might be using a 56 megapixel camera, good enough for me, hypothetically speaking. But if you're using a 112 megapixel camera, it will not come even close to the word good camera. If someone is using a latest iPhone, so perhaps someone's 112 megapixel camera would not be good as well. The word good is a general expression, a very common word, but everyone has a different meaning for them. Everyone has a different understanding of it. For everyone, the definition of a good camera is different. So when it comes to communication process, we need to understand that we're not supposed to use general words. We're supposed to use vivid expression. Had I told you that my mobile has a 56 megapixel camera, immediately an image of the result would have appeared in your mind. Similarly, instead of telling me that I want a bi-monthly report, had you told me that Farhan Sahab, I want the first report at my desk on the 14th of October, on the 15th of October, there would have been no confusion. And this is something we need to keep in mind. I would like to share a video on this. Let us watch a quick video and then I'll move the session ahead. Can someone please confirm if the voice is audible? Is the voice audible?
Yes, it is.
Great.
Farhan, we cannot hear the voice of the video.
Can no one hear the sound of this video?
No, I cannot.
Is the visuals there? Can you see the
Yeah,
visuals?
yeah,
Let's
we
go
can.
through the visuals. Let's go through the visuals and then I'll briefly explain this video to you. And
Okay, sure.
share computer sound. Let me check. It's off. And let's see.
Is repo. Ladies and gentlemen, what this organization really needs is a one-on-one approach.
Easily erasable. Camlin whiteboard markers.
Actually, what this organization really needs is repositioning. That means that
Easily erasable. Camlin whiteboard markers.
what this organization desperately needs is change.
Easily erasable. Camlin whiteboard markers.
All right. So later, did the audio became clear? Were you able to listen to the audio later on?
Yes.
All
Yes,
right.
we could.
So you could. And we can very clearly see here that uh, the meanings were not the same for everyone, right? And this is something we need to be, very clear about. This is one of the basic misconceptions of communication. We say things and then we assume to ourselves that just because we have said it, the meanings are clear to others. Then communication is a verbal process. We've already talked about it that only 20 to 30% meanings are in words, the rest are in the non-verbals. Then communication will solve all our problems. This is also a myth. Partly true as well, but a myth. And why is that so? At times, the best thing is not to communicate. If, let's say, you are in a heated argument and you and the person you are in this argument with both are toned up, at that moment, the more you communicate, the more misunderstanding will emerge out of that interaction. So, what would be the best thing to do? Perhaps distance yourself from that situation, give yourself some time, and cool yourself down. Help the other person, give the other person some time to, tone down. And maybe at a later time when you sit together and discuss the same issue, perhaps you might be able to come up with a solution. But at that moment, when both of you are toned up, perhaps communication would not be the best choice. Then more communication yields better results. Communication overload. Now, many of us think if you want to convince someone, give more and more arguments. Not true again. If you want to persuade someone, trust me, don't give them too many arguments. Give them better arguments. Once in a marketing class, I read that more choices lead to bad decisions. If you have fewer choices, you're likely to make a very smart decision. If you have countless choices, they will only confuse you and you might end up taking a bad decision. And same goes with your arguments as well. If you use countless arguments to convince the other person, these countless arguments will overshadow your main arguments. And that's something you would not like to do. So what do you need to do? Be smart enough and pick the right what? Arguments for the occasion. Before I move ahead, do I have any questions or comments, or things are clear so far? Let us quickly come to the barriers of communication. I'm going to conclude this presentation very shortly because we are about to complete our hour. Challenges of successful communication. Now, a minute ago, I told you that when it comes to interpersonal communication, we need to understand that it's communication that we do with our own self. And we cannot count ourselves as two. Now, let me contradict with my own words. Let us discuss about psychological barriers. When we talk about psychological barriers, we need to understand that we at times are, very different physically and emotionally. So when you look at me, maybe I might look all fine. There might not seem to be any problem or, challenges with me because my body language is confident, my body language is engaging, and there are no symptoms of, any frustration. But you really cannot have any idea what might be going around in my mind. So psychologically speaking, I may be a completely different person. And many a times the psychological aspect will or can affect my interaction pattern with you. Now, there was a very successful comedian, Robin Williams. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that character. Robin Williams, most probably. Some of the popular films he did was Jumanji, Flubber, Peter Pan, and several others. Very successful comedian. You would look at him and you would think that this person is so happy-go-lucky that he might never have had any issues in life. And what did he do? He committed suicide. Such a fabulous comedian took his life. So you can assume the psychological pressures he would be going through. So psychologically, at times we fail to engage ourselves. And that is where it is very important to be aware of your emotions. If you're angry and you are mindful and you are self-conscious and you know that you're in a state of anger, only the realization of your emotion will help you determine what is the right choice of words I need to use. Is that correct? But if I'm not aware of the emotion that I am in, then I'll be saying things that I may end up regretting later. Then comes semantic barriers. It is the word choices. Now, one word can lead to several meanings, and there is a possibility that the meaning you had in mind turns out to be a different one compared to the other person. For example, bi-monthly. When we use the word bi-monthly, being manager, you thought twice a month and you expected the first report on 15th of October. And being the employee, I thought once every 2 months and I presented my report 1st of December. Such a big misunderstanding. And that became a problem. Then attitudinal barriers. Now we need to understand that when it comes to communication style, there are 7 different communication style one can have. You can be an expressive communicator, an analytical communicator, a driver, a passive communicator, an aggressive communicator, a passive aggressive communicator. You can be an assertive communicator. There are 7 different communication styles. So if you have one message and you communicate this one message the same way to all the 7 different communication style users, you need to understand that it will not bring you the best result. What do you need to do? You need to be aware of the other person you are in interaction with, what sort of personality this person has, what sort of communication style this person has. And if you're not aware of it, then you will not be able to adjust your message according to his or her need. End result, misunderstanding. End result, miscommunication. Then we come to physiological barriers. If you're physically too tired, too exhausted, too fatigued, or let's say some part of your body is, I mean, you have a strained elbow, you have, let's say, a plastered foot, the discomfort that you have will affect your communication patterns. Or let's say we are in a communication setting in a training institute, and we are there for a 1 day long training, and the chairs that we are sitting in are very uncomfortable. So we might be completely into the training for 30 minutes, an hour, maybe at best hour and 30 minutes. But as the discomfort will start growing bigger, what will happen? It will become more and more difficult for us to remain connected with the trainer, pay attention, and it will become a big issue and challenge for us. So the physiological barrier can also affect and impair our communication process. And finally comes language barrier. Now, there are so many different languages, more than 7,000 languages that are spoken around the world. And if I'm using a language my recipient is not very proficient in, then what will happen? This person will not be able to understand or comprehend me properly. So let's say if I am communicating with someone and I have two choices: speak the language of that person that I am fluent in, or use English. And I know that this person is not good with English language, but I choose to use English language with this person. What will happen? This person will only partially understand my message, maybe misunderstand my message. So, what will happen? My message will not get across. If you remember, we said that the best message is one that gets across to the other person. And if you're able to do that, that's the best form of communication you can ever do. It's close to 6 o'clock. So, I would bring this webinar to a closing. I would request Ms. Sagba to take it from this point onward and formally close this session. Ms. Sagba, over to you. And yes,
Go on,
have a good.
go on, Mr. Farhan. Actually, Miss Sakba is facing some technical issues, so
All
I'll
right,
be
it's
closing the section.
sure, Khaza. I only wanted to take less than a minute and thank my participants for being such a wonderful audience. The chat box was full of comments and questions and answers, and this webinar would not have been this lively, and this webinar would not have been this interactive without the support of my audience. So I am greatly indebted to all the participants in the chat box who responded and were very actively engaged with the session. Thank you, everyone, and I really appreciate your engagement. Khizar Sahab, over to
Thank
you, and I would also request you, after you close it, if you could take a group photo with the participants. Over to you, Khizar Sahab.
Surely. Thank you, Mr. Farhan, for sharing your valuable insights and